Chuckwagon MTG is sponsored by BC Comics and Games. Welcome and thank you for joining us for another great deck tech video here on Chuckwagon MTG. Today we bring you Infinity War, a modern white-red combo deck that may not follow the Marvel storyline, but it most certainly lives up to its name by bringing us infinite warriors and infinite combats. So let's go over the pieces of this deck. For creatures, we're running one copy of Archangel Avacyn, a 4/4 legendary angel for 3 generic and 2 white mana, with flash, flying, and vigilance, and when she enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn, and whenever a non-angel creature you control dies, transform her at the beginning of the next upkeep. She transforms into Avacyn the Purifier, a 6/5 legendary angel with flying, and when this creature transforms into Avacyn the Purifier, it deals 3 damage to each other creature and each opponent. Next, we have one copy of Denitha, Capuchin Paragon, a 2/2 legendary human knight for 2 generic and 1 white mana that has First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink, and aura and equipment spells you cast cost 1 generic mana less to cast. Then we have 4 copies of Combat Celebrant, a 4/1 human warrior for 2 generic and 1 red mana. If Combat Celebrant hasn't been exerted this turn, you may exert it as it attacks. When you do, untap all other creatures you control, and after this phase, there is an additional combat phase. We also have 4 copies of Kazul's Toll Collector, a 3/2 Ogre Warrior for 2 generic and 1 red mana that has the ability of pay 0, attach target equipment you control to Kazul's Toll Collector. Activate this ability only the time you could cast a sorcery. And lastly, we have 4 copies of Core Outfitter, a 2/2 Core Soldier for 2 white mana. When Core Outfitter enters the battlefield, you may attach target equipment you control to target creature you control. Now let's take a look at the artifacts we have in this deck. We have 3 copies of General's Kabuto, an artifact equipment for 4 generic mana. Equipped creature can't be the target of spells or abilities, and prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to equipped creature, and has an equip cost of 2. Then we have 4 copies of Helm of the Host, a legendary artifact equipment for 4 generic mana. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary if the equipped creature is legendary, and that token gains haste, and it has an equip cost of 5. And then to tie this all together, we have 4 copies of Sigarda's Aid, an enchantment for 1 white mana. You may cast aura and equipment spells as though they had flash. Whenever an equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach it to target creature you control. So let's take a look at what we want from this deck. Ideally, we cast Sigarda's Aid on turn 1 or turn 2. Then, on turn 3, we cast Combat Celebrant. On turn 4, we cast Helm of the Host. With Sigarda's Aid out, we can attach Helm of the Host to the Combat Celebrant for free. At the beginning of our combat phase, Helm of the Host will produce a token copy of Combat Celebrant, which will gain haste. We then declare attackers, we exert the token Combat Celebrant, and then we gain another combat phase. Then, at the beginning of our new combat phase, the Helm of the Host will create another Combat Celebrant token. Then, we just wash, rinse, repeat until our opponent can't block and eventually dies, or they just concede. The majority of the rest of this deck is here to support this combo. Our Core Outfitter can attach our Helm to a creature if it isn't already attached when the Core Outfitter enters the battlefield. Denitha reduces our equipment casting cost, and Avacyn helps to deal with lots of creatures, like slivers, goblins, humans, and elves, etc. The General's Kabuto helps keep our Combat Celebrant, or whatever creature it's attached to, safe from our opponent's removal, and can be flashed in if we happen to have Sigarda's Aid out. And the Toll Collector can equip both equipments to buy us a little bit of time. Now, to help us find the pieces that we need, we have 2 copies of Faithless Looting, a sorcery for 1 red mana, draw 2 cards, and then discard 2 cards. And that also has a flashback cost of 2 generic and 1 red mana. We also have 3 copies of Refurbish, a sorcery for 3 generic and 1 white mana. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. These are to bring back our Helms if they happen to make it to the graveyard. We have 3 copies of Lapse of Certainty, an instant spell for 2 generic and 1 white mana that counters target spell. If that spell would be countered this way, put it on top of its owner's library instead of into that player's graveyard. This is to offer a bit of protection while we set up, or to give us just one more turn to finish off our opponent. Then we have 2 copies of Lightning Bolt, an instant spell for 1 red mana that deals 3 damage to target creature or player, and we have 2 copies of Path to Exile, an instant spell for 1 white mana. Remove target creature from the game. Its controller may search his or her library for a basic land card, put it into play tapped, and then shuffle his or her library. These are both just a little bit of removal because sometimes you just need a little bit of removal. Our land base consists of 2 copies of Cavern of Souls, a land that, as it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. You can then tap it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, but it can only be spent to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, and that spell cannot be countered. This is for any control decks we happen to run into. We also have 2 copies of Field of Ruin, a land that can tap for 1 colorless mana, or we can pay 2, tap it and sacrifice it, destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls, and then each player searches their library for a basic land card, puts it onto the battlefield, and then shuffles their library. This is mainly for Tron decks or those pesky flip lands. Then we have 4 copies of Clifftop Retreat that can produce a white or a red mana, but enters the battlefield tapped unless we control a mountain or a plains. And then we have 4 copies of Inspiring Vantage. It can also tap for a red or a white mana, but it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer lands. And lastly, we have 5 copies of Mountains and 6 copies of Plains in our land lineup. Our sideboard has 3 copies of Abrade, an instant for 1 generic and 1 red mana, and we get to choose one of either dealing 3 damage to target creature or destroying target artifact. Then there are 3 copies of Auramancer, a 2/2 wizard for 2 generic and 1 white mana. When it comes into play, we can return target enchantment from our graveyard to our hand. This is in case they happen to keep getting rid of our Sigarda's Aid. We have 1 copy of Chandra, Torch of Defiance, a planeswalker for 2 generic and 2 red mana that enters the battlefield with 4 loyalty counters, has a +1 ability of exile the top card of your library. You may cast that card, and if you don't, Chandra, Torch of Defiance deals 2 damage to each opponent. It has a second +1 ability of add 2 red mana to your mana pool, has a -3 ability of Chandra, Torch of Defiance deals 4 damage to target creature, and then has an ultimate of -7. You get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, this emblem deals 5 damage to target creature or player. Not only is Chandra a great toolbox card, but can also be a great distraction while we set up. And we have 2 copies of Damping Sphere, an artifact for 2 generic mana. If a land is tapped for 2 or more mana, it produces 1 colorless mana instead of any other type and any other amount. Each spell a player casts costs 1 generic mana more to cast for each other spell that player has cast this turn. This works great against both Tron and Storm decks. There are 4 copies of Guttural Response, an instant for 1 red or 1 green mana that counters a target blue instant spell. This is essentially just for control matchups. Lastly, we have 2 copies of Seal Away, an enchantment for 1 generic and 1 white mana that has flash, and when Seal Away enters the battlefield, exile target tapped creature an opponent controls until Seal Away leaves the battlefield. This is for creatures that our bolts just won't take care of. Well, that about wraps up our look at Infinity War, a modern deck that really lives up to its name with its turn 4 infinite warriors and infinite combats. If you happen to play this game at an F&M or even at your kitchen table, we'd like to know about it. Leave a comment down below on how you did or any thoughts you may have on the deck. I want to thank you very much for watching this with us today. If you liked what you saw, do us a huge favor, click that like button, hit subscribe, be sure to hit the bell notification button so you can tell whenever we have new episodes coming out, and share this with your friends, your family, your loved ones, and your pets. everyone could use a little more magic in their lives. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and as always, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, Chuckwagon MTG. Now, if you could do us a huge favor and check out this brief message from our sponsor. Chuckwagon MTG is sponsored by BC Comics and Games, now at one mega location to fill all of your gaming and comic needs. They have Magic the Gathering events every night of the week, as well as Warhammer, Pathfinder, Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League, Final Fantasy TCG, Pokemon, and Star Wars X-Wing events all throughout the week. They also have close to 100,000 comics on site. This is why I have personally made BC Comics and Games my home gaming store.